Welcome back everybody to InDesign 1. Sorry about that. Getting a little bit of reverberation off the speaker there. This is week 15, webcast 4 in our continuing series of webcasts this week on threading text. In the previous webcast we talked about managing text frames that were threaded, and we're going to continue in this particular webcast and focus on alternative ways to thread text frames and also how to manipulate those future edits to those text frames on a layout basis rather than on a text editing basis. In the last webcast, I finished by mentioning a feature called layout adjustment. And I mentioned that that feature, due to a new feature called liquid layout, is probably on its way out. But I did want to show you how it worked and why I feel that going forward it's really worth the time to investigate liquid layout, because even though liquid layout is designed specifically for interactive output, such as apps and other digital media that you're going to put out on tablets or mobile devices, it's still an awesome way to create alternative layouts for print. So let's get to that first, and then we'll move on with continuing with threading text, just because I feel that threaded text often is part of the reason why we have to adjust a layout. That's not good. Hang on. Wow, not having a good Zoom session here. All right, I have a very simple layout here. It's not even complete, but let me take this out of preview mode so you can see what's going on here. I have a single text frame on the left that has been divided into 2 columns, and then I have 2 separate text frames on the right page. All 3 text frames top out with the top margin, and the single text frame on the left and the single text frame in the left column on the right page also bottom out with the bottom margin. I have an image that only touches the bottom margin as far as margins go, and I keep focusing on margins, and this will make more sense once we see what happens here. And then I have another frame filled with a swatch and a feather pattern that touches the bottom of the page and the top of the page and the right edge of the page, but it does not touch any of the margins. I'm going to open up my Pages panel, and I'm just going to move this over slightly so we can still see what happens here. Let this refresh. I'm going to use the Margins and Columns command under the Layout menu to change the top and the bottom margin. And when I do that, I'm going to make sure that Enable Layout Adjustment is turned off. And it usually is by default. I think you have to turn that on the first time you use it, and then it remembers and stays on. But in this case I'm going to keep it off because this is similar to what we had talked about in a previous webcast. And I'm going to change my margins to 1 inch each. And without even getting out of this dialog, because I have my preview selected, I can see that though the margins have moved in on the top and the bottom, my text frames are remaining exactly where they are. And it's going to take my going in, clicking on each of these text frames, resizing them to get them to adjust to the new margins. So I'm going to cancel that. And again, I need to be sure that I have both of these pages targeted when I use the Margins and Columns command, which I do by double-clicking on the page numbers. I ensure that both the left and the right page are selected. Let's try this again. Back to the Layout menu, Margins and Columns command. But this time I'm going to leave Enable Layout on, change my top margin to 1 inch and my bottom margin to 1 inch. And we see some interesting things going on. This time I'm going to go ahead and click OK and get out of this dialog. First of all, on the left page, the entire text frame shortened to fit within the new margins. And since the top and bottom margins are now larger, going from 1/2 inch to 1 inch, both top and bottom, this text box needed to be shortened by 1 inch. 1/2 inch at the top, 1/2 inch at the bottom. On the right-hand page, the first text box behaves just like the one on the left-hand page. And here's where it gets a little interesting. The text box at the top of the right page shortens at the top, but because the bottom was not touching the bottom margin, it remained the same. Since the image was touching the bottom margin, it moved up by a ½ inch, and now these two objects are overlapping. And if we look at the image or the colorized text frame here on the far right, this one didn't adjust at all because it didn't cross over any of the margins, which would be the right thing for this particular frame to do. So in some ways, layout adjustment is extremely helpful because in a very simple layout, it could save you a lot of time. But I've also seen where layout adjustment can do more harm than good when you have a very complicated set of text boxes and image frames, and it ends up doing things that you wonder why it would even choose to do that. So I want to look at the layout adjustment dialog, and this is where things got a little interesting when we moved to the latest version of InDesign. Actually 5.5 I think introduced Liquid Layout. Liquid Layout replaced the position on the menu where alternate or layout adjustment was. And so how do I get to that dialog? To get to the dialog, I have to go through Liquid Layout. So I bring up this panel, and this is the Liquid Layout panel. And if we go to the Liquid Layout panel menu, we see Layout Adjustment. And this is where I could go to change some of the specifications with layout adjustment to impact how it behaves or how objects behave when I invoke Enable Layout Adjustment. So there are things I can turn on and off, allow graphics and groups to resize, allow ruler guides to move, ignore ruler guides, and ignore object and layout locks, layer locks. But here's the interesting note at the bottom. If you enable layout adjustment, any liquid layout rule applied to pages will be turned off. So that tells me I cannot use liquid layout at the same time I'm using layout adjustment. And since layout adjustment, I go ahead and cancel this, is a far more powerful feature than layout adjustment, I think that in most cases people are going to tend to move towards liquid layout rather than using layout adjustment. I can also access the Liquid Layout panel by going to the Window menu, going to Interactive. Even though Liquid Layout can be used with print media, it's under the Interactive section. And here's Liquid Layout. So that's all I'm going to say on this for the moment. I just wanted you to understand what those terms meant, what they refer to, and maybe take some time to experiment with both of them. They're extremely interesting features. All right, let's move on to more threading skills. We talked about manually threading text frames and going through, clicking on the output, getting a loaded cursor, dropping it into another column, again clicking on the output, dropping it into another column. But now I want to talk a little bit more about unthreading those threaded text frames before we move on to semi-automatic and automatic text flow. I have a single text frame on the left page moving to 3 separate text frames on the right page. Each one has a full column of text. And after I've taken the time to do all of this, and in fact you can see it goes down to another 3 columns on the page following it and another 3 columns following that, I decide that that's not really what I want. I want to turn this center column, let's say, into an image frame. And so I'd rather have the text go from the first column to the third column. To do that, I only need to click on that center text frame, hit my backspace key, which deletes the frame. It does not delete any of the text because all the text that was in that frame now gets pushed into the third frame, which then pushes the next frame, and it goes to the end of the, just keeps pushing through and flowing to the end of the document. And we'll talk about what happens when there's extra text at the end there. Either we get an overset symbol, or we use automatic text flow to automatically create more text frames and more pages. But what I think is even more interesting is now, instead of being lost, InDesign connects this first frame to the next frame that was in the series. So it goes from the first column to the third column. And then it just keeps continuing its flow just as it was before. And if I delete another text frame, it'll do the same thing. So now these are gone, and my text frame has now linked to the next text frame in the series. I'm going to undo both of those because now I want to move to another topic in the same category. What if I changed my mind and I didn't want the text to flow to these two text boxes, but I wanted these text boxes to remain on the page? I just wanted to change the direction that my text flow went. I can do that by double-clicking on the output of the text frame that will be the last in the series that at which point I want to change my direction. So let me just demonstrate this. I'm going to double-click in this output here. If I can zoom in just a hair here. And you can see that I get an overset symbol. And if I move down, all the text that would have continued through these separate pages, and I can see over here in my Pages panel that now they're empty, all of that text has been placed back in this text box, and I have an overset symbol saying, okay, I'm ready to be placed somewhere, but where is that place going to be? I'm going to change direction here. Click on this text box, then click on my overset symbol to get my loaded cursor. And I'm going to move down to this next page, click, and of course I could also then go to this text box and click on the next one and continue manually threading. But the point here is that these two text boxes on the right are still there, and they are still linked together. And they are linked to the remaining text boxes that used to be part of that flow. Every time I take some text from this next text box and place it in another one, it kind of usurps its, it takes the text box away from this threaded group and adds it to this threaded group. So if I click now on the previous page, you can see that these 5 are the only ones left, and then the next 3 on the following page. So you have a lot of flexibility to change your mind after you put together a document. And that's one of the things where I really feel InDesign really shines. If it was just a matter of putting the perfect design together, a lot of programs could do that. But the world of publishing is a world of changes and edits and more edits. And you need a program that's going to give you the flexibility to make those edits quickly and efficiently. All right, how about a case where I have 2 text frames, which are 2 separate stories. So I have a text frame here with 1 paragraph. I can see the import and the output are empty, telling me that this is a single self-contained story. And the same thing here, empty, empty. So this is also a self-contained story. Years ago, if this was the case, you would have to switch to your type tool, select the text, copy it, paste it into this text frame in order to get that text into the same story. And that's not the case anymore. Now I have the option of linking these 2 text frames, even though they're independent. So I could either click on the output of the first frame and then click here in the second frame, or I can click in the second frame, click the import, right, because I'm going in a backwards direction. I still want this paragraph to be at the beginning of the flow. Click, link, and you can see that here is where tree was the last of the first story, and the word then was the beginning of the next story. And we know that they've been linked, obviously, because we have a text thread, but also because the text has moved from the second text box up into the first text box. Now let me go over one other thing here. I don't know if you guys realize that, or some of you might be questioning as you watch this, why did the word then not start a second paragraph? And that's because, and I thought I had my hidden character showing here, that's because each of these stories has an end of flow symbol, but not a paragraph symbol. And I know in the past I've said that an end of flow symbol really does the same thing as a paragraph symbol in the sense that paragraph styles can be applied to it. It can have space above and below, any of those attributes that a paragraph can have. But in this case, without a real paragraph, end of paragraph, it's going to connect these two. So I'm going to go to my type tool, come back into this text box, hit enter, so that I have a Pilcrow symbol. I have an end of paragraph. Now I'm going to go back to my selection tool and connect these two frames. Click on the import, hover over the top, click, and now they are linked, but now the second story is honoring the paragraph end of the first. So just in case you are questioning how two text frames may behave when you connect them, this is the reason why you might see a connection between the paragraphs themselves and no paragraph return in between. All right, let's move to another file here. Let's see, just a second. I have a single page file. I can see that it's just a single page here in the Pages panel. And the pages are based on Master Page A. And Master Page A has 3 column guides, a 3-column setup with column guides. And I know that because these are purple guides. I can see that on the master page there are no text boxes, and there are no text boxes on this first page. Up until very recently, this is how I would always flow large amounts of text, because if you put the master text frames on the master page and then you float in a large amount of text in semi-automatic or automatic mode, it would cover up the text boxes that were from the master text frame with the local ones, and then you would have 2 text boxes, one on top of the other. And most people I know who did longer documents just gave up on master text frames a long time ago. But now we have this new primary text frame. I'm going to show you how that changes it. But first let's get into semi-automatic and automatic text flow. Right. With my selection tool, I'm going to go to my File Place command, bring in this RTF file, okay, wow. For a minute there I thought InDesign was going to crash. Okay. In the previous webcast we talked about manually placing, so that would have been a click close to the margin, then go down and click again, and I don't want to take all that time and effort. So let's go talk about first semi-automatic. Watch the icon in the upper left-hand corner of the place cursor. It's a 90-degree angle with a little tiny black triangle in the corner, and as I approach a guide it turns white, telling me that if I click here it will in fact take that guide into account when it creates the text box. If I hold down my Alt key or my Option key on the Mac, you'll notice that the icon changes to a squiggly. Half the squiggly is solid and half the squiggly line is dotted. This is semi-automatic as opposed to a solid squiggly line, which would be fully automatic. Semi-automatic behaves almost exactly like manual, except that it loads your cursor without you having to click on the output on that overflow symbol. So let's see how this works. With my Alt key or my Option key down, I click. Immediately, my cursor is reloaded. And as long as I keep that Alt key down, it's just going to keep reloading. So I'm going to undo those, start over again, and now let's talk about fully automatic. In the automatic text flow, instead of holding down the Alt or the Option key, I'm going to press the Shift key down. And again, we see the squiggly icon, but this time that icon is completely solid. This mode does far more than the manual and the semi-automatic. Not only does it reload your cursor, it just keeps creating text boxes, moving through your document, adding pages based on the master page layout that you have assigned to the first page in the flow, and it just keeps creating these pages until all the text is placed. So let me just demonstrate that. With my Shift key down, that's going to be both on the Mac and the PC. Click, and very quickly you'll see that it has created 4 more pages. I'm up to page 5, and each page has 3 columns of text, which InDesign has created, all of these columns. And then when it runs out of text, it stops. So there is no text box in this 3rd column. This is, I mean, obviously anyone who has been working with the manual method is going to see that this can save you hours and hours of work if you're working on a long document. Sometimes I flow a document that has 50 pages at a time. College catalogs, when you get into the course listings, and I don't want to have to flow each and every column. I want InDesign to be able to do this smartly by following what I have set up on my master page and flowing the text through. I have an image here from, see if I can find this, an image from Help, and I want to just give everyone a quick visual of the different tools that we have. So manual text flow, as you know, you have to add each frame at a time, and it has this perpendicular angle to the icon with a symbol of text. The second, semi-auto flow, is this squiggly line, half solid, half dotted, which of course you create by holding down the Alt key on Windows and the Option key on the Mac OS. So it's very much like the manual flow. It automates somewhat by loading your cursor. Autoflow is invoked by holding down the Shift key when you click, and it will add pages and frames until all that text is flowed into your document. Here's one that's popular with people who can't just allow InDesign to keep creating pages. Let's say that this is not a manual. Let's say that instead this is a data sheet, and all data sheets in the company are limited to 10 pages. I would instead then create 10 pages, use the fixed page autoflow, which uses the Shift key but adds the Alt or the Option key. And what that does is it keeps creating the text frames, but once it gets to that last page, it does not have permission to continue creating pages. So it's going to be up to you and the editor and everyone else involved with that project to figure out how you're going to get that text to fit, whether that's deleting text, editing out certain subjects, or minimizing the number of images. And let me go back to the semi-automatic and undo this. And I'll show you an example. I'm going to just allow 3 pages in this document. Okay? And go back to my first page. This time holding down the Shift key and the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac. Click. And you can see that it did the same thing that the Auto feature did. But once it got to the bottom of page 3, let's go take a look and see what's going on here. It stops. And now I have overset text. We know I have at least 2 more pages, or a page and a half at least, of text that still has not been placed. But that's fixed auto. All right. In most cases, as I mentioned, when you are placing large amounts of text, you will be doing that with your selection tool, not with your type tool. But there may be cases where an editor replaces one paragraph of text. And you could, technically, select that paragraph that needed to be replaced with your type tool. In this case, you are not talking about using your selection tool, which is really one of the only exceptions where I would ever use my type tool. And then I would choose File Place, and I would place that text and it would replace this paragraph. Even though this is technically possible, this is not something that I tend to do very often. What I do instead is I move over to my pasteboard. And this is just a workflow practice that I prefer, but either one will do the job. And I either draw the text box ahead of time, or I place the text, and as I place it, I drag a text box. So I am in my type tool right now. I'm not in my selection tool. And when I go to the File Place command and choose, I'm just going to choose the same text blurb. And you can see that it filled that particular text box. Now, if an editor had sent me a new version, I would just select that text that was going to be replacing this, copy it, and then go in and paste it. Just because I want to be very careful about what I've selected, how much is being placed, if I accidentally place the wrong file. This way I can see exactly what's being placed and I can copy and paste it. Another thing that I use this type of copy and paste with, a little trick I think I've mentioned before in a webcast, is if I have text from a text source, like something that is maybe Microsoft Word that's been saved as text, or something from Notepad or any of the other text editing programs, and I want it to acquire the formatting where I'm going to paste it. You can do that. I'm going to just select 3 words here and copy them. We can see that these 3 words don't match the Golden Bird formatting at all. But if I place my cursor in a paragraph that has different formatting, and instead of using place, use the place without formatting command instead, it strips it of all memory of formatting, and it takes on the formatting of the paragraph where you paste it. So paste, and now the words "the whole bird," which I copied from right here, has the formatting of that particular paragraph. I find this really, really helpful. All right, I'm going to show you another way you can set up text ahead of time. Let's say that you know pretty much the layout, but you have not been given the text from the editing group or the writing group yet. But you know there's going to be a text frame in the bottom right-hand corner of one of the pages, and you know that there's going to be another text frame on the second page and another on the third page. Oh, and actually I'm on the second page, aren't I? Let me just move that up. All right. Instead of drawing 3 separate text frames and then linking them together, I can also go back to my selection tool, click on the text frame, click on the output, and even though there's no text in here, you'll notice that I'm getting a loaded cursor. So I'm going to go to page 2, and that text frame is going to go across the bottom of the second page. And then I'm going to again click on the output. I get a loaded cursor, and I'm going to draw a text frame here. So I have a text frame in the bottom right-hand corner, bottom half page 2, and right side on page 3. And I would hope if you were laying these text boxes out, you would do a much better job than I'm doing in my demonstration by having some sort of grid layout with guides to help you figure out exactly where those text boxes should go. I've been kind of haphazard about putting them. My point on this is just I want to show you how you can set up a text flow ahead of time. Now, I can either click on this text box, or I can put my cursor in the text box, or I can load text and hover over that existing text box. All of them will give me the exact same result. I'm going to go ahead and click on that first one, and Editor finally gives me the text for this project. I go to File, Place, navigate to the text file, whether it's a Microsoft Word document or an RTF document or a TXT document. The parentheses tell me that it recognizes a pre-existing text box, and when I click, the text flows through those text boxes. And I can see that on my Pages panel, but if I move down, I can see that it's completely filled those 3 text boxes. So you're ready to go. I could later add in the images, or I could have placed the images ahead of time and just been waiting for the text. And as you all know, if you need some placeholder text, you can choose the Type menu, go to Insert or Fill with Placeholder Text. And because these 3 text boxes are linked, it's going to fill all 3 text boxes with that fake Latin text going on. In whatever paragraph style you've designed, you can apply to any of this placeholder text. All right. Another way that I want everyone to realize that they can take some of what they learned from the image grid, just deleting some of this stuff, you can do the same thing with text boxes and they automatically link. Let's just try that. With my Type tool selected, I'm going to start to drag some text boxes. And as I start to drag, I'm going to use that little Gridify shortcut by using my right arrow key twice, my up arrow key once, and notice that all these text boxes are linked. I could then go in if I wanted to with my Gap tool, and I could change the size of these, or let's see, maybe I want to change the spacing between those. And now if I choose one of those text boxes and I bring in some text, it flows all the way through them. So that's another idea if you're trying to quickly get a set of text boxes linked together ahead of time before pouring in that text. All right. Let's talk about Smart Reflow really quickly. I'm going to go back to this semi-auto file, and this threading text file. And let me get to this location here. I'm going to reverse what I did by clicking on that outport, and I'm going to change the flow again, adding these columns back in. Just so flexible. I love that. And I'm going to remove this last page. So I'm going to delete page 12, which has 2 text frames on it. Remember that because it's threaded, I'm not really deleting the content at all. What happens is it ends up getting placed, and I've got this overset symbol telling me that I have more text. So it didn't delete any of the content, it just deleted the text frames in the page that it was on. Often, or for years, people were saying, why can't I just type in an InDesign file like I can in a Microsoft Word file, and when I get to the end of the page, why can't it just create a new page? Especially when people started using InDesign for books. And we came up with all kinds of scripts that we could run, any way we could figure out some way through the back door to get this to work. And there were several things that we did, but none of them were as good as when finally Adobe figured out that this actually would be a great feature, or maybe finally a developer figured out how to make it work. But we now have in our preferences something called Smart Text Reflow. And it's on now by default. In the new version, it's on to limit this to primary text frames. But I often turn this off because I don't care what text frame it is. I want it to continue adding pages and long documents. And this is how this works. Let's say that I do this. I'm going to go ahead and delete this third column. And when I do now, I get a warning. InDesign will insert new pages to prevent oversight text. To keep pages from being added, basically turn off the feature that we just turned on. I'm going to click OK. And now, just hesitating for a moment, you'll see that it went and created page 12 again, added the text frames, and flowed the text into that without me using any type of auto reflow. It figures it out that this is what's going on. So let me just now add a bunch of text by adding a bunch of paragraph returns. And InDesign thinks here for a moment, hesitates, and then boom, it adds a new page. Obviously, if you're working on a 6-page brochure, you do not want this to happen. So you would turn that feature off. But this is a lifesaver for longer documents, especially manuals, where you're adding text, you're deleting text, because you also have the option, I don't know if you guys saw this in the preference dialog, but I also have the option of turning on this checkbox, delete empty pages. So I delete 5 pages of text, it retroactively goes back and deletes those extra pages. So I'm a huge fan of this new feature. In order for InDesign to make this work, if this is not using a primary text frame, you have to have the same text flow already linked to a previous text frame. So for example, if I go into just a new file and I fill this with placeholder text, okay, and I go into my preferences and I say, okay, I want Smart Reflow on. It's on. There we go. And then I just start typing. Nothing should happen. And that's because I have not first linked this to 2 separate text boxes. So the text box that I want InDesign to automatically link going forward needs to already be linked to at least one other text box. So I'm going to add one more page. And in this case, I'm going to manually link these 2 together. Let me see if I can fill this with placeholder text. All right, so now I have 2 pages that are linked. I'm going to add some text, get some paragraph returns. And that should have linked. It should have added a 3rd page for me. Let's see if it'll add a 4th. Oh, and I'll bet you I know what's going on. Did I not turn off? It's probably what I did. I did not turn off limit to primary text frames. And these master pages have no text frames. So let me do this, delete this page. And you can see the moment I deleted it, it went back and created the 3rd page again. I'm going to get rid of all of this extra text here. Delete the third page just so you can see it a little bit slower, because once it takes off, it is really fast. All right, so I have 2 text frames linked. Add some text. Hesitate here for a moment, and there we go. Our third page gets added. So now that we've talked, and this primary text frame actually came up and messing me up here, let's talk about that for a moment. This is where I was saying that I need to get rid of the text here and these 2 pages. This is where my workflow, after all these years in InDesign, I'm really rethinking things. And it has to do with this new primary text frame, which I've talked about in a previous webcast. As you'll remember, you can only have 1 primary text frame flow per master page. So it works really well now for books, which is why I'm really rethinking this. As I said previously, I used to not put any type of master page on any type of text frame on my master page except for headers and footers. I really didn't want the main part of my content that I wanted to auto-flow as part of a primary text frame. But I'm really rethinking this because of the advantages that I have. The other reason I'm rethinking this is if I go back to the semi-automatic for just a moment, when you flow text in through an automatic way and you get 3 separate text boxes, the feature allowing me to, I'm just going to get this heading here, to span and straddle is not available. So for example, if the golden bird gets much larger, let's say that I want this to be a much larger type. In fact, I want it to go over a couple of columns. I want it that much bigger. You see that it's wrapping in this first column. I can't get it to span if these are 3 separate text boxes. I'd have to pull these text frames down manually. Then I would have to take the golden bird out of this text frame, make a separate text frame that I drew across the top that would go across, right? And that's not what I want to do anymore, because InDesign now allows me to straddle text frames as text columns, as long as those text columns are all in the same frame. So this is really what I'm dealing with now. I've got to have a single text frame that instead of using three text frames, I'm going to use 3 columns of text all in the same text frame. Now the golden bird is still wrapping, right? But because now it's in a single text frame, if you remember, I have the option of letting this span. So I go up here to my icon, my split and span field, and I say I want to span 2 columns. And if I don't like the look of that because now this third column is sticking up a little awkwardly, I might go back and say, well, I think I'd rather have it span 3 columns. And when I turn on my preview, I've got exactly the look I was hoping for. So this is also kind of messing up my traditional workflow. So as I rethink this, moving forward and I'm testing different things, I really think a new work approach for me and for anyone who's doing long documents might be to take advantage of the primary text frame and use 3 columns of text in that single text frame, or 2 columns. And let's just use 2 for this example. I'm going to draw a text frame on my master page A. I want to be sure that it is a primary text frame, which it is not. This is just a standard master page text frame. I click the icon so I can see the arrows. That tells me that this is now a primary text frame. The only way to get a primary text frame on this right page and have it be a primary text frame is to link it to the first text box. So I'm going to use my out port to load my cursor, click in the second text frame. I'd like to also show my text threads. And now I see this is a primary text frame and this is a primary text frame. And there is only one primary text frame flow. Since these two are linked, it considers it a single flow. With both of these text frames selected, I'm now going to go into my text frame options and choose 2 columns. And I'm going to make the gutter 1p6. All right. Because page 1 is based on this, I can see that I've got a 2-column system, but the text frame itself is still just a single text frame. And I want to be sure that this is carrying that on, because I should be able to just click in that primary text frame and it automatically acknowledges that, which is exactly what I want. And if I load, I'm on page 1, if I load that same RTF file and place it over the top, not only does it fill that text frame, it went on, acknowledged the auto flow, so I didn't even have to hold down the Shift key. It just did it on its own because, number 1, I had the preference saying that I wanted smart reflow. I'm using primary text frames, and went through and created 4 more pages for me, and all of them are based on this master page A. The beauty of this is that I can go back to my master page A, and I can change my mind and say, you know, now I want these to be 3 columns rather than 2 columns. And when I go back to my body pages, whoops, yes, those both changed. Notice that in a blink of an eye, all these 3 pages have responded. And this is something that I would not get to have happen as seamlessly when I use the old-fashioned master text frames. So the only downfall of this system, and this is the one thing that you've got to think about, and I was actually not doing this in my previous workflows. Let me jump back to this file for a second here. Let's say that you wanted to end a paragraph, which is why I was always kind of against this when people did this. Let's say that you wanted this paragraph to end shorter. Some people would shorten their text frames to get the type of flow that they wanted. For instance, they wanted this paragraph to move to the next text frame, they would just shorten it. And you would get the flow you're looking for, but the problem is if you ever had to reflow the text and that wasn't the right break, you were going to have to manually undo those again. But with this master or primary text frame, and I have 3 text columns in 1 text frame, boy, that's a tongue twister. I can't even do that because if I shorten a text frame, I'm going to shorten all 3 columns. So how am I going to get that text to flow the way I want it to? And actually this is a really nice flow just by accident on this page. Let's go to one that maybe won't be as nice. All right, let's say that I wanted Jorinda and Jorindel, not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but this is too far at the bottom of the column to start a new story. How am I going to get this text to push to the next page? Well, there's several things that you're going to be able to do. I don't like the break commands personally because sometimes people accidentally break with a paragraph style that gets put into the table of contents when you do an auto contents with longer documents. So I like using my keep options instead. I do have the option of clicking in front of Jorinda here and going to my type menu, choosing break character, column break, and it does force it. But when I look at my hidden characters, there is a hidden character here which is formatted as a heading 1. And if I pull all heading 1s into my table of contents, I'm going to get an empty table of contents entry because of this break character. So this is one of the reasons I I'm not always a big fan of those break characters. I'm going to delete it. And instead what I'm going to do is I would first always tell any heading in its paragraph style that it has to stay in its keep options with the next paragraph. So it always has to stay with the next line. We would never want a heading by itself. We've talked about this when we talked about paragraph styles. Go ahead and click OK. And then I might tell this paragraph that it's not allowed to break either. If I do that, and this paragraph then has to go over to the next column since the whole paragraph can't fit in the previous column, it's going to pull that heading with it. Now since I don't want this to always be part of the paragraph, I might do this as a local override. So instead of going to the Paragraph Styles panel, I would go up to my Control panel and choose my Keep Options here, make this a local override and say that I have to keep lines together, all lines in paragraph, and you can see immediately it jumps to the next column. And there are little tricks you can do with this too. You can apply a specific paragraph style that's a duplicate of body, but it's like body no break, or body 5 lines, whatever the case may be. What you're hoping to do is in your paragraph style get the specifications down so well that you have very few bad breaks. For example, this break going on right here at the bottom of this column is completely unacceptable. I have a single line, a widow here, and that would never take place if my body paragraph was defined correctly in its Keep Options portion. And I can see that it's not. First of all, it should always have a minimum of 2 lines, and maybe in a story like this I want a minimum of 3 before and after. When I do that, you'll notice that all of my paragraphs shifted to accommodate that particular change. And I see I have fewer bad breaks because I have at least 3 lines before a break and 3 lines after a break. All right. I want to see if there was anything else I wanted to go through. And I think that is it. So I want to finish this by talking just a moment about the Bodhi project for this week. All right, here's one of the samples. This is a demo sample. Cindy Reese did this, the previous instructor. And you can see that you should recognize 3 of these pages because you've done 3. You've done the title cover page, you've done the quote page, and you've done the other one with a couple of other images. So what we're concerned about in this lab is page 3 and then page 5 and 6. Page 3, the text that is up on the website is the one that this is Bodhi. And you can see in this example that these 3 text frames are linked, threaded, and the last text frame has an empty output telling me that this is the end of that story. If I select all, you can see that that has nothing to do with the linked text going on below that. So however you determine where your text boxes are going to be, how many text boxes you're going to have more than one, because this isn't going to look good with all the text in just a single text box. You're going to want to design around whatever images you put on this page. So all of the methods that we've talked about for linking these text boxes, take advantage of. Pay attention to your type as well. Let's not have any widows or orphans. For instance, I would not want to see this going on, this top line. Right? Go into your keep options. Stop it before the problem even arises. Now you're going to get down to the other piece of text that's uploaded on it's the Dropbox link, and this is Bodhi Boomtown. This is a longer piece of type, and you can see that it is linked. If I show my text threads, this is linked to page 6. And then it goes across from there. So it's going to be necessary to take advantage of the skills that you've learned this week in these webcasts to get a nice flow so that as you're editing, you're trying to get the last two text boxes to end even, or however you're going to do it, this is going to help you with alignment so that you're not copying and pasting text back and forth. You're letting the flow kind of even this out like a slinky. And that's a great way to think of this, is either a water tube that you fold it in half, and as you go back and forth, the water flows from back from the first until it feels an evenness. And I think a slinky from an analogy point of view is a nice object to think about as you're trying to work with these linked text frames. So the only other thing I have not covered yet are these auto page numbers. So if you get going on your lab, just don't worry about the page numbers yet. We can get those in later. And Thursday night's live webcast is going to be talking about several other master page items that we've covered in less detail in previous webcasts, but I really want to nail down these auto page numbers. Anything else that you want to put on every single page, we'll have to put that on a master page. One very last thing, because you may want to do this on your lab, you see where we have a text box within text boxes. I want to show you a really quick example of that. I created a small text box over here. And what if you wanted to use this as a pull quote, like we saw in that Bodhi sample? Create a text box, give it a fill color, a feather, however you're going to design it, making sure that you've got that text moved away from the edges in most cases. Drag it on your page. I'm looking for that center thing here. My center guide telling me that I've centered it on the page. And then with that new text box selected, just go to your text wrap and text around the boundary. Now I have 10 points all the way around. You don't necessarily need that much, but you do want enough, especially if you've put in some type of a feather where you're going to see that break. Once you see the text wrap, you'll see that some parts are going to work better than others. For example, I'm not sure if that's really where I want this wrap to happen here. Maybe it would be better if I moved my text frame up so that I was breaking multiple paragraphs instead of just 2 lines of one. This might be a little bit better look. And that takes care of it. And I know this is very simple. There are lots of things you're going to be able to do with your text and all of the effects that you've learned. But in case anybody is interested in doing that, there's just a little sample of how to make that work. All right, we just have one more webcast this week, and it's going to be the one on more master page elements. So try to get started on your lab, hopefully before then. And like I said, if you have questions about the auto page numbers or anything else that's going to go on that master page, please be sure to send me an email. And just hold off on that until the end of the live webcast, and you can just pop those in at the last minute if you were trying to get yours done by the end of the week. Okay, until the next webcast, signing off.